From Palos Verdes to Palo Alto.
And all points. Beep, boop, beep. In between.
Yeah.
It's the John Phillips Show.
And we continue at 2:05 in the afternoon on the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wang's across the glass.
In a desperate cry for attention, Gavin Newsom is suing Fox News.
I mean, this is the dumbest stuff I've ever heard.
Is there anything that he's unwilling to do for national attention?
He is addicted to it. He cannot handle it if the papers and the TV shows are not talking about him 24/7. He needs it.
How long do you give it before he starts camping out at Rockefeller Center behind the set of the Today Show so he can be in the frame when Al Roker's doing the weather?
Well, if he does that after the new mayor takes over, this is going to be New York City.
Feces everywhere. No compassion.
800-222-5222 is the telephone number. 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, which you can download wherever you download your favorite podcasts. You can also follow him on X at Royal Oaks. Royal Oaks, welcome.
Hey, my pleasure, John. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us on what is turning out to be a very busy Friday in the world of legal news. Let's start out with the Supreme Court rulings that were handed down earlier today. The Supreme Court has given President Donald Trump any number of legal victories at the highest court in the land. The Supreme Court earlier today backed President Trump's effort to curtail lower court orders that have hampered his agenda for months in a case that's related to birthright citizenship. This giant win for President Trump is something that resulted in him applauding the court's ruling, saying that his whole list of administration policies can now move forward, including ending birthright citizenship. The ruling leaves the future of birthright citizenship unclear, however, but signaled President Trump's plan effectively can be move forward and that birthright citizenship can never be enforced. So he is celebrating this right now as we speak. What do you make of it, Royal?
Yeah, it's a mouthful. I mean, you covered so much ground. We need to back up just a little bit. You got two issues. Number one, birthright citizenship. Number two, national injunctions. So birthright citizenship, the Constitution's language suggests that if you're a kid and you're born here, no matter who your parents are or where they come from, you're a United States citizen. Well, Trump, when he took office this time, said, nah, not so much. My order says, no, if your parents are illegal, you're illegal too. And so folks sued. And one judge said, oh, Trump's wrong and the parents are right, and I'm issuing an injunction against that. So it goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, as you indicated, they don't come out and say, oh, Trump was right, birthright citizenship is history. Instead, what they do is they say, this one judge, he issued an injunction. He's got one little trial court district, and he purported to make it applicable to the entire nation. And the high court said, no, you can't do that. Now, that's great for Trump because a lot of left-of-center judges are striking down a bunch of Trump's executive orders. And so this order by the Supreme Court takes that weapon away from the individual judges. But it doesn't come out and say Trump was right on birthright citizenship. And in fact, you could even interpret it as being against Trump because the court didn't strike the injunction down. It said it does apply in that one district. And so it's still open for debate down the road as to whether birthright citizenship is going to go away or not.
What do you think the effect of this will be on federal judges who have cases in front of them that could block policy changes that the White House wants to make? Now that they know that the Supreme Court's saying, hey, you really need to stay in your lane unless there's something really egregious going on, what do you think the effective result will be?
Great point. I mean, it's going to defang the left-of-center judges who wanted to take down Trump's executive orders by saying, well, I may just be a single judge in Butte, Montana, but doggone it, I'm going to shut down the entire federal government. Of course, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. When we have a Democrat president, you have conservative judges trying to strike down stuff. Like when Obama was president and he said, well, I got a pen and a phone, I'm just going to change the immigration law. you had conservative judges striking that down. So this is a blow against the power of judges and in favor of the executive branch.
And you would assume that if you're President Donald Trump, you're flying high right now with the wind at your back. And now that you know that the judges have just been smacked by the Supreme Court, you're probably going to kick things into high gear and be even more aggressive.
Well, that's right. It's kind of hard to imagine how he might do that because, as you've reported, John, I mean, he had a pretty historic fast start out of the blocks on January 20, signing all sorts of executive orders, and it just kept going. But, yeah, he's got a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court behind him on most issues, not always. And so, yeah, he's got to be feeling pretty confident, especially coming after the big deal in Iran.
The Supreme Court also handed down opinions for other major cases, including backing a group of religious parents who want to opt out of their children from reading LGBTQ books in classrooms, rejecting the latest legal challenge related to Obamacare, and punting Louisiana's long-contested congressional map to the fall. So a lot of business going on over there today.
Yeah, and it was kind of a no-brainer, I think, because the stuff about kids in school hearing about LGBTQ stuff and transgender stuff, the case only had to do with elementary school kids. And so a bunch of parents got together and said, look, these kids aren't seniors in high school. They're in second or third grade. And just because the teachers want to push, a trans agenda or all sorts of LGBTQ stuff, we should have a right to opt the kids out of this if we think it's basically propaganda. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, they're right. They have a right to opt out. The other big thing that came, it wasn't a huge surprise. There was a Texas law that says, hey, if you want to go online to check out pornography, that's fine, but you got to prove you're 18 first. A bunch of states have been trying to do that. It was challenged in court, but that was the other big U.S. Supreme Court decision today. The court said, yeah, states are entitled to have this online age verification deal for porn. That's legal.
Well, that's kind of a trick question, though, isn't it? Because when people lie about their age online, they always say they're younger.
That's true. It could get confusing. And really, how are you going to enforce it? Somebody's going to hold up your fake ID to the screen. I don't know how the implementation is going to happen, but at least in principle, states are free to try to accomplish their goals.
We're speaking with ABC News legal analyst Royal Oakes, who you can follow on X at Royal Oakes. Royal, the vice mayor of Cudahy, received a knock on her door from the FBI after she put up a video on social media where she called on two specific street gangs, two deadly street gangs, people who have organizations that have killed police officers in the past, in addition to any number of other people. She called on them to join her in the streets to take on, quote, the biggest gang of them all. And that she was referring to ICE. She wanted the gangs to confront ICE in the streets. The FBI took that as a threat on federal law enforcement officers, and they gave her a little talking to. She then went up on social media after the FBI showed up at her house and said, I think I'm going to need a lawyer. She finally found one. The lawyer is now talking to the local news, and the lawyer is saying, well, she didn't mean anything regarding violence by the video that she put up. What she was advocating for was for gang members to really enjoy their First Amendment privileges and make some protest signs, show up to rallies, register voters, write letters to the editor, do all of the things that you do in a democracy to try to win the argument. What do you make of what's going on there, and do you think she's going to be in trouble?
Well, I think he's making a good point. I mean, wouldn't we rather have the gang members make signs and march as opposed to, killing people and committing mayhem? But it's such a fascinating issue. I mean, I'm sure you and so many of your listeners heard her post or saw the video of it. I mean, she's totally ignoring the fact that these guys are criminals. I mean, they are killers, extortion and kidnapping and all this stuff. And she's treating them, well, come on, homies. I don't hear a peep out of you. The biggest gang of all is invading your turf. So, I mean, how stupid does this sound? But it's a really interesting legal issue that you've teed up there, because on the one hand, you don't want somebody, whether it's a vice mayor of Cudahy or anybody else, advocating violence, urging members to do violent stuff. On the other hand, she's got a First Amendment right to say, I think ICE is the biggest gang of all, and why don't the gangs protect their turf against ICE? you can kind of creep right up to the line by saying stuff like that without advocating violence in any specific way. So it is an interesting issue. This lawyer, Daniel Martinez, I think he's on the right track, saying, look, you show me where she's actually urging a particular act of illegality or violence or hurting anybody. She's just, expressing her First Amendment rights. So it'll be interesting to see whether the hammer comes down and she loses her prestigious job as vice mayor of the city of Cudahy or gets into some sort of trouble with the FBI. But, what are they going to do? Throw her in prison because she said this? There didn't seem to be any really specific threat that she was making.
You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of, and I'm sure you've seen this before in your life. You're sitting at a bar, and there's some guy who's in there who's had a couple too many, and he sees someone that he's interested in, and the guy starts acting like a masher. And he starts saying all kinds of lewd things and coming on to the woman sitting next to him. And then the moment she lets him know that she's offended by his advances, he goes, well, I was only kidding. You misinterpreted what I had to say. You're the one that has the perverted mind. I didn't mean any of that. And it seems like that's pretty much what this vice mayor is doing. Everyone knew what she meant, but now that she might get in trouble, well, I didn't mean that. You're misinterpreting. You're connecting dots that just aren't there.
No, you're making a good point. And John, you and I have known each other for a while. You know me too well. Yeah, I've certainly seen that, like every week. But no, the fact of the matter is, just as the masher, you can interpret his true meaning. Yeah, I really think she's going to skate on this one, because regardless of what her true intent was, you've got to look at her actual words. And it's not exactly the situation where she said, I hereby announce that the MS-13 gang should go to the corner of Florence and Normandy and execute some ICE members. It doesn't come close to anything like that. So I think the First Amendment defense is probably going to work.
Let's say, God forbid, something bad happens, and a member of one of those two gangs goes out and attacks a federal police officer after seeing that video. Would she be in trouble then?
Probably not, because, again, her lawyer would be able to say, we're not responsible for people doing nutty things. It makes me think of that wonderful movie, The Fisher King, with Jeff Bridges. He's playing the shock jock, and he makes some comment. Robin Williams' wife is killed as a result of it. But, you can't really draw a straight line between the statement and the misconduct. If you're going to put somebody in jail or really sue them or whatever, you have to be able to show the proximate cause of what they did.
The problem for politicians, however, is there's a political component to this. And attracting all of the negative attention that she's attracted, she may not be vulnerable in terms of being charged with a crime in federal court, but she does have to go in front of the voters and seek re-election or seek higher office and win more votes than her opponent. And with this kind of bad look that she has generated, that may not be possible.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Setting aside the legal aspects of it, this is just poison politically. And yeah, I think her fellow leaders in the city of Cudahy are going to be inclined to say, okay, you're toast. We can't put up with you doing and saying stuff like that, because if we don't discipline you, then the voters in a year or two are going to say, hey, you put up with what this lady said. Who knows? Maybe there are a lot of folks in the community who are sympathetic to what she said, and maybe the other leaders will think of that. But I think she probably is in a lot of trouble as a practical political matter. You're right.
We're speaking with Royal Oakes, co-host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, which you can download wherever you download your favorite podcast. Royal, the L.A. Tenants Union is calling on city officials to impose a rent moratorium as ongoing immigration enforcement operations continue to spread fear throughout the region, that according to them. How in the world is this legal, where they say, okay, because of the fires, we need an eviction moratorium. So, boom, you get one. Because of COVID, we need an eviction moratorium. Boom, you get one for 2 years. How can they get by declaring everything to be an emergency and saying no one has to pay their bills because of that?
Yeah, this one is kind of squishy. You start out with the default setting. You rent a place, and if you don't pay your rent, it's fair. The landlord should be able to evict you. There are rules. They got to go jump through some hoops, and it takes a while and so on. But that's the general rule. And then come the exceptions, as you say. Oh, my gosh, COVID, we're going to have to, have a temporary eviction moratorium, emergencies, and so on. So now what they're saying is, well, look what Donald Trump is doing. He's forcing everybody to, hide behind their blinds inside their apartment. They can't go outside. And as a result, you shouldn't be able to, evict them because they can't make any money because they can't go outside. Is that really legitimate? I mean, as you think about it, it sounds a little flaky compared to the COVID stuff or some sort of a natural disaster. But, the city council is pretty liberal. They're pretty progressive. It wouldn't be a surprise if they said, yeah, we're going to have a temporary eviction moratorium on this. And so the landlords go to court and they challenge it. And that takes 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever. Mission accomplished. In the time being, a lot of folks are protected from eviction, even though the basis is not exactly a traditional ground for relief.
Let's say they go ahead and get the eviction moratorium, and many of these people stop paying their rent. If you are a landowner, if you're a landlord, you're Mr. Furley, and you are expected to fix the toilet when it breaks, but they're not paying you any money, well, guess what? You also have to pay for the insurance. You also have to pay the taxes on that property. You also have to pay for any special assessments. If it's in an HOA, you have to pay your HOA dues. You have to pay the gardener to make sure that the grass is clipped, the pool guy to make sure the pool is serviced. All of these expenses associated with all of these properties, and I'm sure there's a bunch that I'm forgetting here, you're still responsible for. What is the city going to do for those people? What obligations do they have to the landlords if they're not generating any revenue because of a city ordinance?
Zippo. They're probably going to do nothing, and they got no obligation. And that's because, a lot of people think, these gigantic conglomerates, the Oakwood Garden Apartments people, they don't need money and so on. But, ignores the fact that a lot of people, they aren't all that rich. I mean, when I was a kid, my dad worked at the GM plant in Van Nuys, and he decided as an investment, he'd buy a 6-unit apartment house on Blythe, a few blocks from the plant. And, he had to pay for everything. A lot of folks who have apartments, they're not Donald Trump. And so it's not really fair, and they could end up losing their building. And sometimes the lawmakers will say, okay, we realize it's kind of hard on the landlords as well, so we'll throw them a bone. But usually they don't have to. So, yeah, the whole situation is kind of unfair.
Well, and if they keep doing this, who's going to invest in capital improvements? No one. Because if you make a place look really nice and then they just stop paying the rent and you can't kick them out, then you just wasted all of your money, which is why this town looks like a dump.
Yeah, so if you just want to give away money and redistribute wealth, like, okay, you're a hotel worker, you get $30 an hour, then a lot of hotels are going to close, and then people don't have a place to stay, and the places they do stay at will have to hike up their prices because there are fewer hotels, and they got to pay the $30 an hour. So, yeah, it's just a ripple effect. It's really bad news.
Well, and it's also that they haven't even thought this thing through. Imagine being a small-time landlord, and your tenant comes to you and goes, you know what? You can go ahead and take your bill, and you can shove it where. I'm here illegally, and the city council says I don't have to pay you. If I'm the landlord, my next call is going to be to Tom Homan.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's just an ongoing cycle, and that's just going to make everybody even angrier. If you can imagine people in Los Angeles being even angrier than now. So yeah, it's a vicious cycle.
Royal Oaks, what's coming up on the next Too Many Lawyers podcast?
Well, it'd be obsolete or whatever we say soon, because we're going to talk about Sean Diddy Combs. The new news that just broke this afternoon. The jury is not going to be starting to deliberate Combs' fate this afternoon. We kind of thought they might have an opportunity to have one of these Friday afternoon verdicts, but no, the judge said after the final arguments and the jury instructions, you guys chill over the weekend, come back fresh Monday morning, and decide whether Combs goes to prison for 30 years to life or does he walk and go back to recording rap songs.
All of that coming up on the next Too Many Lawyers podcast, which you can download wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Royal Oaks, thanks so much for stopping by. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks.
It's the John Phillips Show. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the host of National Review's Radio Free California. He is also the author of a piece that is in the Wall Street Journal titled The Public Sector Union Behind LA's Immigration Agitation. Will Swaim, welcome.
Always a pleasure, John. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by. And your piece in the Wall Street Journal is a very good one and raises a very important point. And that is that the protests or riots or civil unrest or however it is you want to describe it that we've seen in the streets of downtown LA, Paramount, and other places around the country are not organic. They have funding, they have organization, and they have a political message that will benefit very specific groups. You've researched this and written about it. What can you tell us about it?
I think this is the most interesting thing, is just the weird language that we have around this that you just sort of indicated. You know, we talk about, peaceful protests and demonstrations. A lot of the protests, we find out very quickly, were organized well in advance, anticipating that when Donald Trump came into office, he might, in fact, enforce federal immigration law. And it's really important for us to remember that that's what the president is doing, despite Newsom's claims to the contrary. So the activists in LA began setting up what they called the Los Angeles Rapid Response Network. The chief architect of that was the head of the Service Employees International Union, a guy named David Huerta. The group's organization insisted, SEIU is one of the largest government and private sector unions in California with hundreds of thousands of members. And Huerta set this up so that activists could show up wherever federal agents were moving, like literally camping out outside federal buildings and watching ICE activities for months before the June crackdown on illegal immigration. So Huerta just happens, air quotes, to be present at a place where federal agents are serving search warrants and arrest warrants in a warehouse in South LA County. He just happens to be there as this activity unfolds, and he and others quickly try to block a driveway. This is on June 6th, as ICE agents are carrying out these federal arrest warrants. And he orders this crowd, he urges them, rallies this crowd of protesters to sit in the driveway and block vehicles, federal vehicles. That's when an ICE agent asks him, I would argue, very politely, it's on video, you can hear it, to please clear the driveway. And instead, Huerta shouts out to his fellow protesters, this is a public sidewalk, they can't stop us from doing this. Reality quickly collides with David Huerta, and he's arrested. And he makes himself into a kind of a saint, but sort of a guy who is just out there just helping to spare poor immigrants. He always uses the word immigrants rather than undocumented or illegal, and to avoid federal harassment. So the long story here is that this project, this collision, the riots that we saw unfold were carried out in large part by SEIU. And that's an organization whose union brand has been now for decades the goal of organizing illegal immigrants into a labor union, an authorized federal and state-sanctioned union, to get these illegal immigrants in there and to get them to pay membership dues to SEIU, that is to pay them money in return for the promise of protection, legal and, you might argue, extra legal in the form of these riots.
This sounds like a protection racket like we saw in the old days of La Cosa Nostra.
It sounds exactly like that, doesn't it? It's, if you pay us something, illegal immigrants, if you pay us something, we're going to give you this legal protection. If you don't have this legal protection, some terrible things might happen to you. You better pay us.
Yeah, I don't know how they can legally get away with this, because let's just say, for example, you're a dues-paying member of the SEIU, and you're paying your dues so that your union can get you better wages, better health care, better retirement, better working conditions, all the things that unions are supposed to fight for. But instead of spending their money on that, they're spending money on people who aren't even members of that union yet. I guess at some point in the future, they could potentially be members of the SEIU. But right now, they're not. If you're a dues-paying member and your money is going to something other than what a union is meant for, couldn't you sue them? Couldn't you have legal standing and say, okay, you're using this organization for a political purpose or your own personal profit or whatever the case may be, and you're not allowed to do that?
Yeah, I think you've got it exactly right. There are internal contradictions in this business model to begin with. It's important just to recognize a slight clarification on your comment there. There are already right now illegal immigrants inside SEIU who are dues-paying members. That's a fact. SEIU states proudly and boldly they don't care about your documentation. They don't care whether you're here illegally or legally because they do not recognize federal authority on this issue. If you're here and you're undocumented, that's just a symptom of America's injustice and unfairness and unethical and lawless behavior, they argue. So SEIU has, for decades now, spent millions and millions of dollars running the political campaigns of candidates who get into office and then do things like sign off on the sanctuary state bill. California became a sanctuary state, that is a protection system for illegal immigrants, because of SEIU. They were the guys who pushed this, who elected the candidates, who approved it, who elected the governor, who signed off on it. This is Jerry Brown, and then you've got Gavin Newsom, of course, more recently. So that's where the money is being spent. Now, the internal contradiction is unions in California certainly used to oppose illegal immigration because having illegal immigrants here who are only here precariously and who will work for almost nothing is going to undermine the position of workers who have achieved something over time through those union activities that we all sort of recognize. Representing you in the workplace, getting higher wages, safer working conditions, et cetera. Unions used to oppose illegal immigration because of that. California's Chinese exclusion ban, 120-something years ago, was pushed for by labor organizers. They did not want cheap labor coming into California. But SEIU's unique brand, its business model, has been to welcome those kinds of people in and then pass sanctuary state laws. All of your listeners will undoubtedly know, John, and I know you do because you've talked about this so frequently, the expansion of Medicaid benefits to illegal immigrants. Medicaid, we call it Medi-Cal here, of course. That's the California version of it. But we've expanded this now over the years under Gavin Newsom to include illegal immigrants. SEIU was the prime mover on that. So it's a union that has uniquely embraced illegal immigration as reasonable and justified, and they have done everything in their language to blur the line, to eradicate the line between the words illegal immigration and immigration, so that all immigrants are here, are all equal, are all deserving of the same sorts of protections as any citizen would get or any person on the path to citizenship.
Is that when Democrats lost their mind on immigration, when the SEIU split away from the AFL-CIO, and instead of being one voice in a greater union that believed that workers' wages needed to be protected above all else, you now had this offshoot that became very powerful with a lot of dues-paying members, a lot of voters who openly advocated for open borders? Is that when the Democrats went south?
I think the Democrats went south when they tried to secede from the Union in 1860, but that's another story. But there is something similar here, right? I mean, the secession of the southern states under the Democrats is very consistent with the progressives' deep desire to flout immigration law. And I think this is the tragedy, John. You and I, both born and raised here in Southern California, many of your listeners born and raised in Southern California, we have grown up, especially in the last, say, 40 years, we've grown up in a culture that has become really bound up with a lot of people who we know or who we suspect are here illegally. They may be nannies, they may be workers in a kitchen or a hotel. They may be our friends. They may go to our churches. Their children may go to our children's schools. Because of California's laws, which have exacerbated, which have allowed and boosted illegal immigration. And the result is that, when you start to see people pulled out of your community who you know or suspect are here illegally, but it would become a part of your community, it's going to hurt. But this was an inevitable collision that the Democrats in California, certainly, and the unions, put us on this path to collide with a federal administration, the Trump administration, and its determination to impose what the federal law says with regard to immigration. Is this, this was clearly, to answer your question more directly, SEIU's evolution in this direction, that is the direction of pushing for higher levels of illegal immigration, treating illegal immigrants as if they were citizens. All of this stuff created real fractures inside the Democratic Party, or just let's call it liberal politics more broadly. And it was revealed as recently, John, you'll remember this, I think it was 2022, when a bunch of major political leaders, Latino political leaders, met at the offices of the California Federation of Labor. That's the big union umbrella group up in LA. They met at the LA County office for that group. And what did these Latino officials say? Well, it was caught on tape, John, you'll remember this, and it was a bunch of Latino political leaders on the city council, in labor, just ridiculing other Latinos, especially Oaxacans. For some reason, this Latino group did not like Oaxacans. But they went after illegal immigration. They talked about black people in disparaging ways that were mindful of the Jim Crow South. They revealed their real racism and hatred of recent arrivals in California. That's how folks inside the left really think about this stuff. They are divided. They don't like it, but they come together politically because they are, if nothing else, Leninist in their discipline and their messaging. Unlike folks on the right who can get into brawls in broad daylight, the left doesn't like this stuff. We only know about this stuff sometimes because it gets leaked out, but I used to be a leftist. I hung around these people. Illegal immigration is not something the left is really all united in defending.
Well, speaking of that rift, is it causing a rift among the unions themselves? Because you look at what's going on right now with the SEIU, where they're way out on the left, advocating for open borders and anarchy in the streets and everything else. And you look at what some of the other unions are doing. Well, the Border Patrol workers, they have a union, and they endorse Donald Trump. We know, for example, the police were behind Donald Trump in the last election, their unions. And also the Teamsters, the president of the Teamsters got an opportunity to speak at the RNC. In years past, you would never assume that a lot of this would be possible. But I think the SEIU being so far out there on the fringes is causing some of the other unions to go, wait a minute, we're definitely not that.
Yeah, I think when I was a lefty, they called this brand damage. You're damaging the brand of the left by allowing illegal immigrants in here. You're probably too young to remember, John. I'm older than you are. But you may know this historically, that even the Sierra Club, just a couple of decades ago, the Sierra Club nearly broke apart in California because there were groups. There was a faction inside this big environmental group, the Sierra Club. There was a sizable faction who said, we have to start limiting the population. We have to push for birth control, and we have to shut down the borders. We cannot afford to have more people coming here from south of the border. That set off the social justice groups inside the Sierra Club who said, how dare you, you racists? They quickly patched over that difference, but it still persists today. And you're right to point out that there are natural boundaries, borders, cleavages in the union movement itself. So you've got SEIU at one extreme, and as you point out, border control and police are at the other. But they all kind of come together with the idea that they can share the trough. They can make space for one another. So you got cops and firefighters and teachers and SEIU and AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and others, all kind of feeding at the same government trough. And they can get along peaceably, like animals in one of those African safari kinds of documentaries. Everybody comes down to the watering hole, and it's pretty cool for a little while until one of the alligators starts running around. SEIU is the alligator. When I was a lefty back in the day, and I worked with unions, Everybody hated SEIU. They were considered pirates, brigands. They would do whatever lawless activity was required to organize. And I think they're starting to see the full flowering of this. But we are going to see this cleavage, I think, go deeper, and it's going to create problems for the left generally.
Last question before you go. The Central District of California has a new U.S. attorney. His name is Bill Asaley, formerly of the California State Legislature, and he said he is going to aggressively prosecute anyone who assaulted a federal officer or damaged federal property, broke federal laws. And one of the people that was arrested was the gentleman that you just referenced, the man in charge of the SEIU, a guy by the name of Huerta. And Bill Asaley on this program said he doesn't care who you are. If you break the law, he's going to prosecute you, and he's not going to drop the charges because elected officials call him and ask him to do that. What do you think is going to happen if this guy doesn't get special treatment?
Well, he clearly violated the law, and I am not a lawyer. I'm a huge fan of Bill Asaley's, have been for years. Very experienced federal prosecutor who, as you say, spent some time in the assembly. I'm delighted by the news that he will go after anybody who violates federal law. This, again, I think, John, this is the collision course. A federal government finally determined to impose federal law on this issue of immigration. And now a prosecutor in place in LA in the name of Bill Asaley, who is prepared to bring the hammer to people who have now for decades tried to just flout federal law with the expectation they'd be left alone. I can't say what's going to happen in Huerta's case because, again, I'm not an attorney. But, boy, it sure looks bad. He defied a direct order to move. He fought with cops and struggled with them in the streets. And I would say that his larger concern, Huerta's larger concern, ought to be that he's charged with something like a RICO claim, that he has used that kind of, you described it as La Cosa Nostra, right? This kind of mob-like sort of strategy, a protection racket in the state of California.
Will Swaim, host of National Review's Radio Free California podcast. You can download that wherever you download your favorite podcasts. You can also follow him on X at Will Swaim. Will Swaim, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks as always, John.
It's the John Phillips Show.